The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Again, Jesus spoke in reply to the chief priests and elders of the people in parables and said, "The kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. He dispatched his servants to summon the invited guests to the feast, but they refused to come. A second time he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those invited, behold, I have prepared my banquet. My calves and fattened cattle are killed, and everything is ready. Come to the feast.' Some ignored the invitation and went away, one to his farm, another to his business. The rest laid hold of his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged and sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The feast is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy to come. Go out, therefore, into the main roads, and invite to the feast whomever you find.' The servants went out into the streets and gathered all they found, bad and good alike, and the hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to meet the guests, he saw a man there not dressed in a wedding garment. The king said to him, 'My friend, how is it that you came in here without a wedding garment?' But he was reduced to silence. Then the king said to his attendants, 'Bind his hands and feet and cast him into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Many are invited, but few are chosen.'" The Gospel of the Lord. With all the rich imagery of this feast that we have God preparing for us and the prophet Isaiah with this rich feast and choice wines, this feast the king is throwing, I have a hard time getting over that man at the end of the parable who is thrown out of the feast. I mean, he was doing his own thing, not planning on going to a wedding that day, told to come into this feast, and then tied up and tossed outside because he wasn't dressed appropriately. How was he supposed to figure out that he was going to be invited? Who goes to work dressed up for a wedding just in case? You never know when a surprise wedding is going to pop up, so best look your best. This isn't how the world works. And thank God it's not how the gospel works either. In antiquity, a garment would be provided by a king for significant events. As guests arrived, they would be given something to signify they were going to be in the presence of the king for the occasion. We see this happen in the book of Genesis when Joseph's brothers arrive in Egypt. Pharaoh gives them something to wear before him. Maybe all these other folks showed up in the same condition, not prepared, but received the gift that they were given, chose to wear their garment, whereas this man, for whatever reason, decided he looked good enough as it was. Maybe he chose not to wear it. Maybe this is the case. Either way, what could this garment mean? Why would it be given at all? I'd like to think of this garment as something you and I have already received, our baptismal garment. After we were plunged into the waters and united to Jesus in his death and promised a share in his resurrected life, we were presented by the church with a white garment and told to bring it unstained to the kingdom of heaven. This symbol of purity, of being made new in Christ, is not just a fancy dress we give so we can have nice pictures of the infants after their baptism. It's a symbol of our being washed clean in Jesus. It's an outward manifestation of the new interior disposition that we have, that we are chosen by God. We are members of his family. He calls us beloved son and beloved daughter. The baptismal garment is no mere novelty or trinket or some fluff just to fill up the baptismal ritual. It's our uniform and heraldry as Christians, and we ought to wear it often. It may not surprise you, I no longer fit into my baptismal garment. Many of you probably don't either, but we have reminders of this. My brother priests and I, at every Mass, we celebrate, wear an alb, a white vestment reminding us of our baptismal promises. You would be totally within reason as Christians to wear one whenever you came to Mass. Admittedly, this would look very odd if everyone showed up wearing the same thing. I'm not suggesting that we do it. They're expensive. And we don't need them. We don't actually have to be wearing a white garment everywhere we go as a sign that we were baptized. We don't need any physical garment to be living out our shared baptismal vocation to holiness. Our dignity of being called beloved son and daughter by the Father really doesn't have anything to do with how we dress. It's a gracious gift from God that we are called to respond to. Maybe we should remind ourselves over and over again that this proclamation of the kingdom, the invitation that we receive, is not something that is going to happen someday in some theoretical distant future. The invitation to join in the wedding feast and to celebrate is not an invitation that comes at an unknown hour on an unknown day, once and for all. It comes to us every day. When we are out in the main streets, when we are out in the fields working, it comes to us in our homes with our families, in our workplaces with our colleagues. The invitation to the wedding banquet comes to us every hour of every day. We are constantly called to gather in celebration of the wedding feast of the Lamb. And indeed, this is the wedding feast of the Lamb to the church, to you and to me. We are invited to celebrate our own union with one another and with our God. This is not a wedding we are called to be spectators at. We're the ones who have been proposed to. The garment we're invited to bring is our own wedding garment, and we ought to dress appropriately for that. Unlike the man who shows up empty-handed, we are called not to treat our baptismal garment as some fragile and breakable relic that we need to keep safe and out of sight so it doesn't get damaged or broken. It should be worn daily. It's meant to be used and worn. It should be worn into those workplaces and homes. When we use our hands and our feet and our wits to serve our brothers and sisters, we should be wearing that baptismal garment. When we go places like the Catholic Worker and Logan Center, we're wearing that wedding garment. When we visit the sick and the imprisoned, when we give food and drink to the hungry and thirsty, when we welcome the stranger into our homes as we would accept Jesus himself, when we encounter the less fortunate and act with mercy, we're wearing that wedding garment. Our wedding garment can't be left behind or unused because the kingdom of heaven isn't a pop quiz that we want to cram for at the end of time in some distant future. It's a reality that unfolds here and now before us. We're expected to carry that garment with us daily because we aren't expecting at the end of time, at some unexpected moment, an invitation to some unknown wedding banquet. We carry our garments daily because we expect every day to receive that invitation at all times and in all places, to receive the invitation to make the kingdom of heaven at hand and to invite others into that banquet. It's a daily decision, and one that isn't always easy, to remind ourselves that it's Christ who lives in us, that we've died to self and taken on the life of Christ, and we must allow his kingdom to reign in our hearts. We hear and know what that kingdom looks like. We hear in the prophet Isaiah that death is destroyed, that there is abundance and goodness. It's a kingdom we long for and anticipate. A kingdom we anticipate, like St. Paul says, whether we have abundance or we have nothing, whether we're wanting or lacking or able to give. The kingdom of heaven comes to all, the bad and the good alike. Even though we are weak and imperfect and sinful, we still come here to this, our wedding feast, to receive strength from our bridegroom, who offers us himself. We renew our trust and commitment to allow God to work wondrously through us. Then, at every moment, we expect to find the rich feast of the good things that God has prepared manifest here in our midst. It gives us the strength to proclaim and herald the gospel and to accept the invitation offered to us by God to join him at the wedding feast.